The scorching desert wind carried screams of war. 240,000 Byzantine soldiers stood against 40,000 Muslims. One man would change history forever. Today, we don't just fight for land. We fight for eternity. Khalid bin Waleed's voice echoed across the battlefield as his sword glinted in the blazing sun of August 636 CE. The Yarmouk Valley stretched endlessly, and on its plains stood the greatest army the Byzantine Empire had ever assembled. Emperor Heraclius had sent everything he had: massive infantry formations, armored cavalry, and Greek fire weapons that could burn a man alive. Abu Ubaid rode up beside Khalid, his face grave. "Commander, they outnumber us 6-1. Our men are exhausted from days of skirmishes." Khalid's eyes never left the enemy lines. Numbers don't win battles, faith does. But faith without strategy is foolishness. He turned to his commanders gathered around. "Listen carefully. We'll divide our forces into mobile cavalry units. When they charge, we retreat. When they tire, we strike." Ammar bin Isra stepped forward. "They'll think we're running." "Let them think that," Khalid smiled coldly. "Pride has destroyed greater armies than theirs." August 16, 636 CE, dawn broke over the valley. The Byzantine war drums thundered like approaching doom. Their cavalry, 100,000 strong, began their charge. The ground shook beneath the weight of armored horses and men. "Fall back!" Khalid's command rang out. The Muslim cavalry retreated in organized formations, the Byzantines pursuing eagerly, thinking victory was at hand. But Khalid was watching, calculating. The Byzantine forces stretched thin, their formations breaking as they chased the seemingly fleeing Muslims. Now, like a whip snapping back, the Muslim cavalry turned. Khalid led the charge himself, his black banner cutting through the dust. They struck the Byzantine flanks with devastating precision. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. For 6 days and nights, the battle raged. Each day brought new challenges. On the third day, the Byzantines unleashed their Greek fire. Flames consumed everything they touched. Khalid gathered his men that night. Tomorrow, they'll use fire again. But fire needs fuel, and fuel needs carriers. Target the men carrying the fire weapons. Cut off the serpent's head. August 20th, 636 CE, the final day. The Byzantine commander Vahan launched everything in one massive assault. This was it, the moment that would decide the fate of empires. Khalid positioned himself at the rear of his own forces. "Any man who retreats will answer to me personally," he declared. Then he did something unexpected. He ordered the women of the camp to stand behind the army with tent poles and sticks. When some soldiers tried to fall back from the overwhelming Byzantine assault, they were met by Khalid bin al-Aswar and the Muslim women. "You run from men while women stand firm?" Khalid shouted, striking them with her tent pole. "Go back and fight." Shamed and reinvigorated, the men returned to battle with renewed fury. Khalid saw his moment. The Byzantine center had pushed too far forward, creating a gap. With lightning speed, he led his elite cavalry around the Byzantine flanks, encircling them in a devastating maneuver that military historians would study for centuries. The sword of Allah struck like thunder. His cavalry smashed through Byzantine lines, cutting off their retreat routes. Panic spread through the imperial army. What had been an organized assault dissolved into chaos. By sunset, the greatest army of Byzantium was shattered. 70,000 Byzantine soldiers lay dead on the plains of Yarmouk. The Roman Empire would never recover its eastern territories. Khalid bin Waleed stood among his exhausted men, covered in dust and blood. He had fought in over 100 battles and never lost. But as he looked at his fallen companions, his voice was heavy. "Victory belongs to Allah alone. We were merely his instruments." Abu Ubaida approached him. "You've changed the course of history, Khalid." "No," Khalid said quietly. "Allah changed history. I just had the honor of being present when he did." The Battle of Yarmouk on August 20th, 636 CE wasn't just a military victory. It was the end of Byzantine power in the Levant and the beginning of a new era. The man they called Saifullah, the sword of Allah, had carved his name into eternity with nothing but faith, genius, and unwavering courage against impossible odds. The dust settled over Yarmouk, but Khalid bin Waleed's work was far from finished. As bodies were being buried and wounds treated, a messenger arrived from Medina. The new caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab had sent urgent orders. Khalid broke the seal and read in silence. His face showed no emotion, but those who knew him well saw something flicker in his eyes. Abu Ubaidah noticed. "What does the caliph say?" Khalid folded the letter carefully. "Umar has relieved me of command. You are now the supreme commander of the Syrian forces." Shock rippled through the gathered officers. Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl stepped forward, his voice rising. "This is outrageous. You just won the greatest victory in Muslim history and he removes you?" "Watch your tongue." Khalid's voice was steel. "Umar is the caliph and his command is law." Abu Ubaidah's eyes filled with tears. "Khalid, I cannot." "You are the superior general." "This makes no sense." Khalid placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. "It makes perfect sense. Jung fears that people will attribute victories to me rather than to Allah. He's protecting the faith from the cult of personality." He smiled slightly. He's right to do so." That night, Khalid sat alone outside his tent, staring at the stars. He had served under Abu Bakr as supreme commander, winning battle after battle. Now, at the peak of his military glory, he was being demoted. A young soldier approached hesitantly. "Commander, forgive me, but why aren't you angry?" "Any other man would rebel." Khalid looked at him. "Do you know what my greatest fear is? Not death in battle, not defeat, but that I might fight for my own glory rather than for Allah. Umar just saved me from that fate." The soldier didn't understand. "But your legacy, my legacy?" Khalid laughed softly. "Boy, I was an enemy of Islam once. I fought against the Prophet at Uhud. I killed Muslims. Then Allah guided me, forgave me, and gave me a second chance. Everything after that has been a gift I didn't deserve." August 642 CE, 6 years after Yarmouk, Khalid bin Waleed lay on his deathbed in Homs, Syria. His body was covered in scars, testimony to over 100 battles. But he had died in bed, not on the battlefield as he'd always hoped. His closest companions gathered around him. He was barely able to speak, but his eyes were still fierce. "I fought in countless battles," he whispered, "from the wars against apostates to Persia, from Damascus to Yarmouk. I have scars on every part of my body. Yet here I am, dying in my bed like a camel." Tears streamed down the faces of the warriors around him. They knew what he meant. He had always wanted to die a shaheed, a martyr in battle. "But perhaps," Khalid continued, his voice growing weaker, "this is Allah's mercy too. Perhaps he's teaching me that even this dying peacefully requires submission to his will." He took his last breath shortly after. On August 21, 642 CE, the sword of Allah had been sheathed forever. When news reached Umar in Medina, the caliph wept openly. Despite having removed Khalid from command, he knew what the Ummah had lost. "Women will never give birth to the likes of Khalid again," Umar said, his voice breaking. But Khalid's legacy lived on. His military tactics were studied by generals for centuries. His conversion from Islam's fiercest enemy to its greatest defender inspired millions. The conquest of Syria, Iraq, and Persia that he began would continue, spreading from Spain to China. In the streets of Damascus, an old soldier who had fought at Yarmouk told his grandchildren about the day he saw Khalid bin Waleed charge into impossible odds. "He fought like he had nothing to lose," the old man said, "because he knew this world was nothing compared to what awaited in the next." Years later, Byzantine historians would write about Yarmouk with horror and reluctant admiration. Emperor Heraclius, upon hearing of the defeat, reportedly said, "Farewell, Syria. What an excellent land this is for the enemy." But they all agreed on one thing. They had never faced a general like Khalid bin Waleed. His genius wasn't just in tactics or courage. It was in his absolute certainty that death was not the end, but the beginning. And perhaps that's the real lesson of the sword of Allah. He taught us that true strength comes not from the sword you carry, but from the faith that guides your hand. He showed that a man can go from being Islam's greatest enemy to its most legendary defender, that pride can be conquered, ego can be subdued, and even in demotion and death, there can be victory. Khalid bin Waleed died in 642 CE, but his spirit never died. It lives on in every person who faces impossible odds with faith, in every leader who puts duty above ego, in every warrior who fights not for glory, but for something greater than themselves. The sword of Allah was finally at rest, but the example he set would echo through eternity.